The parking lot outside Lakeview Hall smells like cut grass and expensive perfume. Rows of chrome catch the last orange light of a Georgia evening, a matte black Range Rover, two identical white BMWs nose to tail, a Mercedes so clean it looks like it's never touched a road, and parked crooked at the end of the row, coughing gray smoke into the golden air, is a 25-year-old sedan, the color of rust and regret. It shudders once, twice, then dies with a groan that sounds almost embarrassed of itself. For a second, the whole lot goes quiet. Then a woman near the entrance laughs, sharp, delighted, the kind of laugh that wants to be heard. Another lifts her phone before she's even sure what she's filming. Somewhere behind a cluster of cocktail dresses, a voice drops low enough to pretend it's private. Please tell me that's not Naomi Tyson. It can't be. The driver's door creaks open on a hinge that's needed oil since spring. Naomi steps out in a plum-colored dress that fits her like it was made for tonight. Soft light against dark skin, her father's old silver watch loose on her wrist, because she never could bring herself to get the strap resized. She doesn't rush. She rests one hand on the sedan's faded roof for just a moment, the way you'd touch the shoulder of someone who got you somewhere against the odds. Thank you, she murmurs, so quiet it's only for the car, or maybe for the man who used to drive it. She has no idea that half the reunion is already watching. Inside the tent, string lights hum over a dance floor that hasn't opened yet, and the whispering moves faster than the DJ's playlist. She came. She actually drove that thing. Didn't she used to be top of the class? Candace Reeves gets there first, gliding over in heels that add 4 inches she clearly needed for the moment. Naomi. A pause, timed like a knife. I almost didn't recognize you. Hey, Candace. Naomi smiles. Easy, unbothered, the kind of calm that makes people angrier than an argument would. I heard things have been hard. Candace's eyes flick toward the parking lot, toward the wreck of a car still ticking as it cools. So what happened? You had so much potential. I've had a meaningful life, Naomi says. It's not the answer anyone wanted. It doesn't sound wounded. It doesn't sound rehearsed either. It sounds like something she actually believes, and that unsettles the circle around her more than tears would have. The questions sharpen anyway, the way they always do at these things. Are you married? Naomi shakes her head. Not yet. Someone catches her bare left hand and laughs like she's caught a fish. I knew it. Too picky. Someone else? Softer. Almost kind about it. So you're still alone? Naomi opens her mouth to answer that one. Her phone buzzes against her palm instead. Lee SangHo, running a little late. Don't leave without me. Something in her face changes. Small, private, gone before anyone thinks to notice it. She types back with her thumb hidden against her purse. Take your time. I'm fine. Then she slides the phone away and lets Candace keep talking, because none of them need to know yet. Not like this. Not with their faces already arranged for pity. 7,000 miles away, on a hangar floor slick with something darker than rain, a man kneels with his hands zip-tied behind his back. A dozen armed men stand in a ring around him, and none of them are breathing loud. Lee SangHo straightens the cuff of his black suit, like he's adjusting for a photograph. Not a verdict. His face doesn't move. It never does. That's what makes rooms like this go silent faster than shouting ever could. I'm sorry, the man on the floor says. It was a mistake. You put someone precious to me in danger, Lee says. Just one sentence. He doesn't raise his voice. He never needs to. Then he turns and walks toward the door, and the only thing he says is quiet, almost bored, thrown back over his shoulder. Handle it. His men move before the words finish landing. Lee doesn't look back. He's already checking his watch, and for the first time all day, something in his expression softens. He reaches into his jacket pocket and pulls out a small velvet box, turns it once in his fingers, and allows himself a small, private smile. I promised her, he says, to no one. He boards the helicopter waiting on the tarmac. The blades start to spin. Back in Georgia, Naomi finally slips away from the tent, out toward the dark edge of the parking lot, where her father's car sits crooked between 2 vehicles worth more than her old house. She runs her fingers along the peeling paint on the hood. Dad, she whispers, I survived another one. That's when she hears it. A low thump, distant at first, then closer, then unmistakable. The the deep, rhythmic beat of helicopter blades cutting through the evening air. The music inside the tent cuts off mid-song. Champagne glasses stop halfway to open mouths. Someone points at the sky and laughs the nervous laugh people use when they don't understand what they're looking at. The helicopter grows from a speck to a shape to a roar, and it's not passing over, it's descending. Straight down, straight at the reunion, wind tearing through tablecloths and hairstyles and somebody's expensive updo. Every single guest is on their feet now, frozen, staring. Naomi turns around slowly. Her face says the same thing everyone else's does. This can't be for us. The skids touch grass. The door slides open. And a tall Korean man steps out in a suit that costs more than most of these cars combined, and he doesn't look at a single one of the people staring at him. He walks straight through them, calm and unhurried, until he's standing in front of Naomi Tyson. He takes her hand like it's the most natural thing in the world. "I'm sorry I'm late," Lee SangHo says. "I told you, I would never miss this day." Nobody in that tent moves. Nobody breathes. Candace's mouth is still half open around whatever she was about to say next. Welcome back to Afro K Obsession, your home for addictive Afro-Korean romance stories. Every story you hear on this channel is written and produced right here, just for you. Nobody else's script, nobody else's voice. In this episode, I wanted to sit with something a lot of us carry quietly: the ache of being underestimated by people who only ever saw the outside of your life. What Naomi's about to go through, being laughed at for what she drove, doubted for who she loved, misjudged for exactly the wrong reasons. I think a lot of you know that feeling. Before we keep going, drop where you're watching from tonight and what time it is where you are. I always love scrolling through and seeing how far this story travels. All right, let's get back into it. The silence in that tent doesn't break so much as it splinters. 100 different reactions all landing at once. Candace takes a step back like the grass under her heels has turned to ice. Somewhere behind her, a champagne glass finally finishes its journey down and shatters on the wooden floor. Nobody bends to clean it up. Lee doesn't seem to notice any of them. He's still holding Naomi's hand, and his thumb moves once, gently, over her knuckles. The smallest gesture, the kind only she would recognize as, "I'm here now. I've got you. You're..." Naomi starts, and even she doesn't know how to finish that sentence in front of 40 people who thought they knew everything about her 5 minutes ago. "Late," Lee finishes for her, mouth twitching at the corner. "I know. I had a situation. A helicopter situation," she says, and something in her voice cracks open into a laugh despite everything, because that's exactly the kind of understated nonsense he'd say after crossing an ocean. Behind them, a man clears his throat, one of Lee's security detail, hovering at a respectful distance near the aircraft, scanning the tree line out of pure habit, even here, even now. Nobody at the reunion notices him doing it. Naomi does. She always notices the details other people miss. Candace recovers first, because women like Candace always do. She steps forward with a smile stitched back onto her face, hand already extended. "I'm so sorry. I don't think we've met. I'm Candace. Naomi and I go way back." "I know who you are," Lee says. "Pleasant. Even. Devastating. Naomi mentioned you." He doesn't elaborate. He doesn't have to. Candace's hand hangs in the air a beat too long before she lowers it, and for the first time all evening, she has absolutely nothing to say. The questions come anyway, because people can't help themselves. How did you two meet? What do you do? Is that a real helicopter? Naomi answers what she wants to answer and lets the rest hang unanswered in the humid air, and Lee stays close to her side the entire time, one hand resting light at the small of her back, present without performing. Monica Price, who spent all night whispering behind manicured nails, finally works up the courage to ask the question everyone's actually thinking. "So, what does he do? For work, I mean." Naomi glances at Lee. Lee looks back at her, something unreadable passing between them. Permission, maybe, or a private joke about how impossible that question actually is to answer honestly at a high school reunion. "Investments," Lee says simply. "Family business." It's not a lie. It's just not the whole shape of the truth. And Naomi feels the familiar weight of that settle in her chest, even as she smiles through it. because she knows exactly how many layers are folded into those two words, and how long it took her to learn all of them. The reunion doesn't recover its rhythm for the rest of the night. Music starts again eventually, but quieter, like everyone's afraid of drawing attention back to themselves after watching a man land an aircraft for a woman they'd already decided didn't matter. 18 months earlier, none of this existed yet. Not the helicopter, not the ring in his pocket, not even the certainty in Naomi's voice when she says, "I've had a meaningful life," and means every word of it. 18 months earlier, Naomi Tyson was folding aprons in the basement of Mount Calvary Baptist Church on a Saturday morning, and her biggest problem was that the donated bread was going to run out before the line did. Her mother, Deborah, had been sick for going on a year by then, some mornings good, most mornings not, and Naomi had rearranged her whole life around it without ever calling it a sacrifice. 2 jobs, a caregiving shift that started before sunrise and rarely ended before midnight, and Saturdays at the food bank because her father used to say that helping people who had less than you was the only kind of interest that ever paid you back twice. Walter Tyson had been dead 4 years by then. Deborah kept his tools in the garage exactly where he left them, and Naomi still talked to the old sedan like it could hear her, because in some stubborn, quiet way, she believed it could. That Saturday, rain came down in sheets, the kind of Georgia downpour that turns gutters into rivers in about 90 seconds. A man walked into the church basement, soaked to the collarbone, dress shoes ruined, dragging a suitcase that had clearly never been dragged through actual weather before. "My car," he said, in an accent Naomi couldn't quite place yet. "It." He stopped, seemed to reconsider the sentence entirely. "It stopped working." Naomi looked him over. Expensive coat, expensive haircut, absolutely soaked and absolutely lost, and made a decision that would end up rerouting both their lives. She handed him an apron. "Well, you're here now," she said. "Might as well make yourself useful. Can you cut vegetables?" Lee SangHo, heir to an empire that made grown men kneel on hangar floors, stared down at a stained church apron like it might explain itself. Yes, I can cut vegetables." "Good. Knife's over there. Don't cut your finger off. We don't have time for an ambulance today." He didn't correct her assumption that he was some late volunteer with a broken rental car. He couldn't have said exactly why, except that for the first time in longer than he could remember, nobody in the room was afraid of him, and it felt like stepping into a room with the lights turned back on. "He cut vegetables badly," she corrected him without any patience for his pride, which nobody had done to him in years, and something about that, her complete unwillingness to be impressed by him, made him want to stay long after his car service finally arrived to collect him. He came back the following Saturday, then the one after that. "Your accent's getting better," Naomi told him one afternoon, 3 weeks in, both of them elbow-deep in canned goods. "Say it again." "Bless your heart." "Bless your heart," Lee repeated, flat and careful, like he was diffusing something. No. You gotta mean it like you're being sweet, but you're actually saying somebody's a fool." He tried again, got the cadence wrong in a way that made Naomi laugh so hard she had to set down the can she was holding. He didn't understand the joke, exactly, but he understood the sound of her laughing, and he decided somewhere in that basement that he wanted to hear it as often as physically possible for the rest of his life. He learned her rhythms the way he learned everything, carefully, completely, without ever announcing that he was paying attention. He noticed she got quiet when she was overwhelmed and stopped asking her questions when that happened. He noticed she always got cold in air-conditioned rooms, so he started keeping a spare cardigan in whatever car he happened to be using that week. He noticed the little silver watch on her wrist, too big for her, and never asked about it until the day she offered the story on her own. "It was my dad's," she said, turning it once around her wrist. "He passed a few years back." Heart. A pause. "I keep meaning to get the band resized. I never do." Lee didn't say he was sorry, because he'd learned by then that Naomi didn't want sympathy handed to her like a transaction. He just sat with her in the quiet a moment, then said, "Don't get it resized." "Why not?" "Because you keep touching it when you talk about him. If it fit right, you might stop." Naomi didn't have an answer for that. She just looked at him a long moment, like she was seeing something underneath the expensive coat for the very first time. Their romance built itself out of ordinary Tuesdays. He learned she stole fries off any plate within reach and never apologized for it. She learned he straightened crooked picture frames without noticing he was doing it, that he removed his watch before anything serious, like time itself should step out of the room for what came next. She caught him attempting one of her mother's southern recipes one evening, a disaster of burnt chicken and scorched cast iron, and laughed until she cried while he stood there, utterly defeated, holding a spatula like a man surrendering a weapon. "I believe," he said, staring down at the ruin on the stove, "this chicken has resigned." "It didn't resign," Naomi wheezed, wiping her eyes. "You murdered it." Deborah Tyson met him for the first time on a Sunday afternoon, 4 months in, when Naomi finally admitted there was somebody she'd been letting help with the food drive more often than the food drive strictly required. Deborah, sharp-eyed even on her worst days, took one look at the way this stranger pulled out her chair before Naomi could even reach it and said, flat as a church pew, "Well, you didn't tell me he had manners." "Mama, I'm just saying, most men your age don't know what a chair's for except sitting in it." Lee, for his part, spent that entire dinner more nervous than he'd been in any boardroom in his life, fumbling his way through fried catfish and a candied yam recipe that had been in Deborah's family longer than the state of Georgia had paved roads. When Deborah asked him, point blank, what his family did for work, he answered carefully, "Shipping and construction, mostly," and left it there, and Naomi watched him do it and told herself the vagueness didn't mean anything. He came back the next Sunday, and the one after that. Somewhere around the 5th Sunday, Deborah stopped setting a place for him and started just assuming he'd be there, which in a household like hers was the closest thing to a blessing a man could receive without anybody saying so out loud. There was a night, maybe 6 months in, when Naomi caught him standing very still in her father's garage, running one finger along the workbench Walter Tyson had built with his own hands 20 years earlier. Every tool still hung exactly where he'd left it, because neither Deborah nor Naomi could bring themselves to move a single wrench. "You don't have to be careful with anything in here," Naomi said from the doorway. "It's just a garage." "It's not just a garage." Lee didn't turn around right away. "This is the only room in this house that still smells like him." She'd never told him that. She'd never told anyone that, not even her mother, because saying it out loud made it too real, too easily broken. But he'd noticed on his own, the same way he noticed everything about her that she never said directly, and in that moment, standing in a dead man's garage with grease-stained tools older than either of them expected to matter, Naomi understood that she'd fallen in love with him without ever deciding to. Their arguments, when they had them, were small and almost always about the same thing. Naomi refusing help she thought she hadn't earned, Lee quietly offering it anyway. He tried once, early on, to have her mother's insurance switch to a better plan without telling her first. Naomi found out and was furious in a way that surprised them both. "You don't get to just fix my life without asking," she said, arms crossed, voice tight. "I wasn't trying to fix it. I was trying to help. Those aren't the same thing to you?" He'd gone quiet a long moment, turning that over. "No," he admitted finally. "I think, where I come from, they usually are the same thing. I'm learning they're not supposed to be." He unwound the change without another word, and never tried it again without asking first. It was a small moment, in the grand shape of everything that came after, but it was the first time Naomi saw him actually bend for her instead of simply providing, and something about that mattered more than any gesture with a bigger price tag ever could have. He proposed 8 months in the church basement, of all places, on a Saturday, with flour on his sleeve and a ring he'd had made specifically because the stone reminded him of the color of her dress the first day it rained. Naomi said yes before he even finished the sentence, because by then she'd stopped waiting for the version of her life where good things came with fine print. She still didn't know who he really was. That came apart on an ordinary Thursday, the way most disasters do, quietly, and by accident. Naomi had gone to his hotel to bring him dinner, since he'd skipped both lunch and a phone call he usually never missed. His assistant, distracted and rushed, left a folder open on the desk. Naomi wasn't looking for anything. She was just reaching past it for her phone charger when she saw the photograph clipped to the top page. Lee, unmistakably Lee, standing over a man on his knees, flanked by armed men, his face wearing an expression she'd never once seen him use with her. She didn't scream. She didn't drop anything. She just went very, very still, the way she did whenever the ground shifted under something she thought was solid. Lee found her sitting on the edge of the bed 20 minutes later, folder closed in her lap, hands perfectly steady. "Tell me it's not what it looks like," she said. He could have lied. He'd lied to plenty of people, his whole life, as a matter of professional survival. He didn't lie to her. "It's what it looks like," he said. "Some of it, not all of it." He told her everything then. The empire his father built and died protecting, the legitimate businesses layered over the ones that weren't. The years he'd spent telling himself that duty mattered more than the version of himself he actually wanted to be. He didn't ask her to forgive any of it. He just laid it out, plain, the way she'd taught him to talk about hard things, without hiding behind pretty language. "You lied to me," Naomi said finally. Her voice didn't shake. That was almost worse. "I never lied about how I feel about you. You lied about everything else. Which one am I supposed to trust?" He didn't have an answer that would survive that question, and he knew it. She left that night, ring still in its box on the hotel nightstand, and neither of them said the word goodbye, because it felt too permanent for something that still hurt this much. Weeks passed in silence. Naomi buried herself back into her old jobs, her mother's care, the food bank, the rusty sedan, the whole shape of a life she'd built long before a stranger in a ruined suit ever walked into it. She told herself the ache would fade. It didn't. Then Deborah collapsed. It happened fast. A fall in the kitchen, an ambulance, a hospital corridor that smelled like antiseptic and fear. Naomi sat in a plastic chair for 6 straight hours, not knowing if her mother would wake up, and somewhere in that blur of paperwork and specialists, arriving faster than she'd ever managed to get an appointment on her own, she stopped asking questions she was too exhausted to want the answers to. It was only weeks later, going through the mail, that she found the notice from the hospital's billing office. Balance paid in full. No further action required. No name attached. No note. Just a wall of zeros, where a mountain of debt used to be. She knew immediately who it was. She sat at her mother's kitchen table with that letter in her hands for a long time, feeling something complicated crack open in her chest. Gratitude tangled up with anger. Love tangled up with the exact fear she'd been trying to protect herself from. She didn't call him, not because she didn't want to, because she needed trust, not generosity, and those weren't the same thing no matter how much it might have looked like it from the outside. Lee, for his part, never mentioned it, never used it as leverage, never brought it up, never let anyone tell her it came from him. He was, by then, quietly starting to believe he'd lost her for good, and had begun the long, grim process of accepting it the only way he knew how, by throwing himself back into the work he'd never wanted in the first place. It was Madame Choi who finally broke the silence between them, the elderly woman who'd run his father's household since before Lee was born, who'd watched him grow from a boy who wanted to design cities into a man who inherited a war instead. She found Naomi outside the estate gates one gray afternoon, having driven 3 hours to a country she barely knew how to navigate, because she'd decided a woman deserved to hear this from someone who actually knew, not from a letter or a rumor. "You don't understand what you are to him," Madame Choi said, in careful, deliberate English. "You think this started at that church basement. It didn't." She told Naomi about a night years earlier, before the food bank, before any of it, when a man traveling anonymously through the American South had been ambushed outside a small church, bleeding out on the steps while people walked past him, too afraid or too indifferent to stop. She told her about a young woman who did stop, who tore off her own sweater to press against the wound, who stayed until the ambulance came, gave no name, and disappeared into the rain before anyone thought to ask who she was. "That woman," Madame Choi said quietly, "was you." Naomi's whole body went cold. She remembered that night, vaguely, distantly, the way you remember doing something ordinary. She'd told herself it was nothing. Helping a stranger bleed less wasn't heroism to her. It was just what you did. She'd forgotten his face within a year. He never forgot hers. "He spent 3 years looking for you," Madame Choi said. "He had people search half of Georgia for a woman he only saw for 11 minutes in the rain. When his car broke down near that church basement, it wasn't an accident, child. He recognized you the second you handed him that apron. He never meant to lie his way into your life. He only wanted the chance to say thank you. And then he fell in love with you for real. The wanting to say thank you part, that ended in about a week. Naomi sat with that revelation for a long, silent moment, feeling the entire architecture of her own story quietly rebuild itself. Every conversation, every quiet gesture, every cardigan kept in a car, every peppermint he carried because she'd once mentioned, offhand, that she liked the smell. None of it had started where she thought it started. It had started years earlier, on a rainy night she barely remembered, with a kindness she'd never once expected to be repaid. "Why didn't he just tell me?" Naomi asked. "Because he was afraid," Madame Choi said simply, "that if you knew the truth, you'd think he only loved you out of debt. Not out of choice." Telling Naomi cost Madame Choi something real. She'd made a promise to Lee's father, years before his death, never to speak of that night to anyone. A promise meant to protect the family from exactly the kind of exposure Naomi now represented. Within days of that conversation, word reached the estate, and for her own safety, Madame Choi was quietly relocated away from the household she'd run for 3 decades. She never regretted it. She simply never told Lee she'd been the one who finally opened the door he couldn't bring himself to open himself. Naomi drove back into Seoul that same evening, heart pounding harder than the rain against the windshield, and found Lee standing on the balcony of his apartment, watch removed, jacket gone, looking like a man who'd already made peace with losing everything that mattered. "You searched for me," she said, before he could say anything at all. "For 3 years." He went very still. "Who told you that? Does it matter? Is it true?" A long pause. Then, quietly, "Yes." "Why didn't you just tell me? All those months we spent together, why let me think it started with an apron and a broken-down car?" "Because," Lee said, and for the first time since she'd known him, his voice actually wavered, "if I told you the truth, you'd have spent every day afterward wondering if I loved you, or if I just owed you. I didn't want you to ever doubt which one it was." Naomi crossed the balcony and took his face in both hands, the way he'd never once let anyone touch him except her. "I already know which one it is," she said. "I've known for a long time. I just needed to stop being afraid of what loving you back was going to cost me." It wasn't a clean reconciliation. There was no music swelling, no perfectly worded speech. There was just 2 exhausted people choosing, again, deliberately, to try, this time with nothing hidden between them. They got engaged again 3 weeks later, quieter than the first time, in the kitchen of his apartment, with burnt rice on the stove, because some things about them never really changed. Before they told anyone else, Lee insisted on one thing, that he do this properly, in front of Deborah, the way his own mother had taught him a man was supposed to ask. He flew to Georgia with a small lacquered box tucked carefully into his suitcase, dates and chestnuts arranged inside it, with more precision than most people put into wedding rings. Deborah met the whole production with her arms crossed and one eyebrow raised, watching a grown man in an expensive suit lower himself to his knees on her kitchen linoleum next to a plate of fried catfish and sweet tea. "What exactly is happening right now?" she said, "and why is there fruit in a box?" "It's a tradition," Lee explained, formal, careful, clearly having rehearsed this. "In Korea, when a man wants a family's blessing, he offers dates and chestnuts. The number the mother catches in her skirt is meant to predict how many children the marriage will have." Deborah looked at the box, looked at Naomi, who was biting back a smile by the door, looked back at Lee. "Son, I am not catching fruit in my church skirt in my own kitchen." "You don't have to catch them," Naomi said, laughing now, sitting down beside him on the floor. It's his way of asking for your blessing, Mama. Properly." His mother would have done the same for his father. Something in Deborah's face softened at that, not at the tradition itself, which she still found faintly ridiculous, but at the plain fact that this man, powerful enough to land a helicopter on a whim, had gotten down on a kitchen floor to ask an old woman with a bad hip for permission. She reached out, took one chestnut from the box, and set it deliberately on top of her sweet tea like a garnish. "There," she said, "blessed. Now somebody help me up off this floor. My knees aren't what they used to be either." It became, over the following weeks, One of Naomi's favorite stories to tell. The night a Korean crime lord's heir knelt on cracked kitchen linoleum in rural Georgia and got outmaneuvered by a 60-year-old librarian with a chestnut and a church skirt she refused to use. Peace didn't last. It never does. Not in a world like his. Word reached a rival organization, one that had spent years circling Lee's family, waiting for exactly this kind of weakness to surface. That the future head of the Lee empire had a fiancé in America with no security detail, no protection, and no idea how dangerous loving him actually was. A man named Director Baek Ji-hoon, who'd hated Lee's father before he'd ever met Lee, decided Naomi was the fastest way to bring the whole empire to its knees without firing a single direct shot at Lee himself. The first warning came as a photograph, mailed anonymously to Naomi's mother's house. A picture of Naomi leaving her second job, time-stamped, with no note attached, except the implication that someone had been watching long enough to know her schedule by heart. Lee flew to Georgia within hours of hearing about it, security in tow, fury barely leashed behind that famous stillness of his. He wanted to move Naomi somewhere sealed off, guarded, invisible. She refused, before he'd even finished laying out the plan. "Absolutely not," she said. "I'm not disappearing from my own life. Naomi, this isn't a negotiation. Everything's a negotiation with you, SangHo. That's the whole problem." She softened, just slightly, at the flash of real fear behind his composure. "I'll take precautions. I won't take a cage." He compromised, against every instinct he had. 2 quiet, unobtrusive men rotating shifts near the house. Nothing that would announce itself to the neighbors. Nothing that would turn Naomi's ordinary life into a spectacle. It felt to him like nowhere near enough. It felt to her like already too much. 2 weeks later, the second warning came, sharper than the first. Naomi's rusty sedan wouldn't start one morning, not the usual cough and struggle, but total silence, and when Lee had it looked at, his people found the fuel line deliberately cut, clean, professional, the kind of damage meant to be discovered, not to actually hurt anyone yet. A message wearing the shape of a threat. Lee's stillness cracked that day for the first time since Naomi had known him. She found him afterward standing in the garage, staring at the car her father built a life around, jaw tight, hands curled at his sides in a way she'd never once seen from him. "I did this," he said quietly. "By loving you, I put a target on the one thing that survived him. You didn't do this. Baek Ji-hoon did this." Naomi stepped closer, put both hands flat against his chest, the way she did when she wanted him to actually hear her, instead of just absorbing another blow in silence. "Don't you dare turn this into another reason to disappear from me, to keep me safe. That's not protection. That's just a prettier kind of leaving." He didn't answer that night, but something in him had already started shifting, the first real crack in the belief he'd carried his whole adult life, that duty and distance were the same kind of love. The third warning was the one that finally broke the standoff completely. Word came through one of Lee's few remaining loyal contacts that Baek Ji-hoon, sensing Lee's restructuring was weakening his own grip on power within the organization, was done sending messages and planning something final. An attack not on Naomi directly, where security would be tightest, but on the one place she'd never think to protect, the church food bank, where she still volunteered every single Saturday, rain or shine, guarded by nothing but folding tables and good intentions. That was the night Naomi stopped arguing about walls and started arguing about something else entirely. "I'm not going to live like a prisoner because of a war I didn't start," she said. "It's the only way I can guarantee you're safe." "No." Naomi's voice didn't rise, but it didn't waver either. "It's the only way you feel like you're doing something. There's a difference." She stepped closer, close enough that he had to actually look at her instead of past her at the threat. "If loving me means I'll always be your weakness, then change your world. Don't just build higher walls around me. Tear down the parts of your life that make walls necessary in the first place." It landed harder than any threat Baek Ji-hoon could have sent, because Lee realized, standing in that garage with the smell of motor oil and old rain still clinging to the walls, that he'd spent his entire adult life trying to protect the people he loved from a world he'd never once tried to actually leave. What came next was the hardest 6 months of his life, harder than any negotiation, any hostile takeover, any threat he'd ever absorbed and returned in kind. He began dismantling the violent infrastructure his father built, one piece at a time, transferring control of every legitimate business to executives he could actually trust, cutting loose the men who profited from fear rather than loyalty. Some left quietly, others didn't. There were betrayals, men he'd known his whole life choosing Baek Ji-hoon's promises over Lee's reforms. There were losses. There were nights Lee sat alone in his father's old office, wondering if he was destroying the only inheritance he had, or finally becoming the man he'd wanted to be, since he was a boy who loved drawing cities instead of empires. Baek Ji-hoon made his final move the night before Lee finished the transition entirely. A last, desperate attempt to prove Lee's reforms had left him vulnerable, sending men not after Naomi directly, but after the church where she still volunteered every Saturday, a message aimed squarely at everything she loved. It didn't work. Lee's remaining loyal men intercepted the attempt hours before it reached Georgia soil, and Baek Ji-hoon, cornered by the same associates he'd tried to turn against Lee, was handed over to authorities by his own people rather than risk going down with him. It was, in the end, exactly the kind of quiet, bloodless resolution Lee had spent months trying to prove was possible. That power didn't have to mean violence to survive. When it was finally, truly over, Lee didn't call. He got on a plane, which brings the story back, full circle, to a lakeside reunion tent in Georgia, a rusty sedan parked crooked among luxury cars, and a helicopter descending out of an orange sky exactly when he'd promised it would. By the time the tent settles back into something resembling a party, most of the guests have quietly reorganized their opinions of Naomi Tyson. Candace tries twice more to reinsert herself into the conversation, each attempt a little more transparent than the last, and each time Naomi answers her politely and lets the moment pass without ever reaching for the satisfaction of rubbing any of it in. That was never who she was. Even now, with every reason in the world to enjoy it. Near the end of the night, Lee notices the rusty sedan still parked crooked at the edge of the lot, headlights of a Ferrari gleaming beside it, like an insult it never asked for. He glances toward his security team, toward the helicopter waiting patient and enormous on the lawn, and then back at Naomi. "May I ride home?" he says. "In the car your father loved?" Naomi's eyes fill before she can stop them. "You want to ride in that? I want to ride with you. The car's just where you happen to be sitting." She laughs, wet, disbelieving, completely undone, and hands him the keys like she's handing over something far more precious than an old set of ignition keys ever should be. The helicopter lifts off without them, carrying his security detail back toward the airfield, and the two of them pull out of the lot in a car that rattles and groans, and somehow, impossibly, starts on the first try. Behind them, through the rearview mirror, Naomi watches the reunion tent shrink into string lights and distance. Nobody's laughing now. A few of them are still standing in the parking lot, watching a man worth more than their entire graduating class combined disappear down a dark Georgia road in a 25-year-old rust bucket, holding hands with the woman they spent all night pitying. Halfway home, Lee pulls the car over onto the shoulder, engine idling rough beneath them, crickets loud in the ditch grass outside. "I have something for you," he says, reaching into his jacket. "If it's another velvet box, SangHo, I swear." "It's the same velvet box," he admits. "I never stopped carrying it." He opens it there, on the side of a dark Georgia road, in a car that smells like motor oil and 40 years of somebody else's road trips, and asks her again, not because she ever doubted he loved her, but because this time there's nothing folded away underneath the question. No secret waiting to surface later. No debt disguised as romance. Just two people who've already survived the worst version of their story, choosing, deliberately, to build the rest of it in daylight. "Yes," Naomi says, before he even finishes the question, the same way she said it the first time. Except this time, there's nothing left to find out later. I wrote this story thinking about how many of us have been underestimated by people who only ever saw the surface of what we were carrying. Do you think Naomi was right to walk away when she found out the truth, even though she still loved him? Would you have forgiven the secrecy, or needed exactly what she needed, proof, not just apology? And that reunion moment, Was Lee choosing the rusty sedan the real proposal before he ever opened that box? Let me know down in the comments. If stories like this one mean something to you, stick around. This channel exists to keep telling them, one at a time, exactly like this.